Most people believe musical genius in classical history was isolated, European, and solitary. But what if I told you that one of Beethoven's greatest influences was a black violinist whose name was almost erased from history? When I uncovered the story of George Bridgetower, it completely changed how I saw classical music and who history chooses to remember. Before I break this down, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because stories like this deserve to be heard. In this video, I'm revealing the truth about George Bridgetower, the black virtuoso violinist who trained with Beethoven, inspired one of his most famous compositions, and was later written out of the spotlight. This isn't speculation or myth. It's documented history that was minimized, renamed, and quietly forgotten over time. A child prodigy born into two worlds, George Augustus Polgreen Bridgetower was born in Poland in 1778 to a fascinating mix of cultures. His father was of West Indian and African descent, while his mother was Polish. His father worked as a servant in the household of Prince Esterhazy in Hungary, the same palace where the great composer Joseph Haydn served as music director. From the very beginning, young George was surrounded by the finest music Europe had to offer. By the age of 9, he was already performing concerts in Paris to rave reviews. The audience couldn't believe what they were hearing from someone so young. Thomas Jefferson, one of America's founding fathers, was actually in attendance at one of his early Paris performances. By the time George turned 10, he was performing at London's most prestigious theaters, including Drury Lane and Covent Garden. King George VIII himself attended one of these concerts and was completely amazed by the boy's talent, royal protection, and musical excellence. In 1791, something remarkable happened. The Prince of Wales, who would later become King George IV, took George Bridgetower under his personal protection. This wasn't just a casual sponsorship. The prince arranged for George to study with the absolute best teachers available. He learned from Francois Bartholomew, who led the Royal Opera, and from Thomas Atwood, who had been Mozart's own student. For 14 years, Bridgetower served as the first violinist in the prince's private orchestra. He wasn't just playing at royal gatherings. He was performing in around 50 major concerts across London between 1789 and 1799. This was during a time when racial prejudice was widespread. Yet Bridgetower's extraordinary talent earned him respect and fame throughout European high society. He became fluent in 5 languages, including English, German, French, Italian, and Polish. This made him a sophisticated figure in European aristocratic circles, not just a talented musician, but a cultured gentleman. The fateful meeting with Beethoven. In 1803, Bridgetower traveled to Vienna, the musical capital of Europe. He carried with him letters of introduction to Vienna's elite aristocratic circles. Through Prince Lichnowsky, one of Vienna's most important musical patrons, Bridgetower was introduced to Ludwig van Beethoven. The two musicians hit it off immediately. Beethoven was absolutely blown away by Bridgetower's violin playing. He called him an absolute master of his instrument. At that time, Beethoven was working on his violin Sonata No. 9 in a minor. He was so impressed with Bridgetower that he decided to write it specifically for him to perform. The piece was incredibly challenging, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible on the violin. The historic performance that changed everything. On May 24, 1803, Beethoven and Bridgetower premiered the sonata together at the Augarten Concert Hall in Vienna. The performance was legendary for several reasons. First, Beethoven had been working on the piece right up until hours before the concert. Some parts weren't even finished. Bridgetower had to sight-read portions of the violin part by looking over Beethoven's shoulder while they played. During the performance, Bridgetower made a spontaneous change to his part, adding an echo of what Beethoven had just played on the piano. Instead of being upset, Beethoven was thrilled. He jumped up from the piano and shouted in German, "Once more, my dear fellow." The audience, filled with European aristocrats, demanded 2 encores. It was a complete triumph. After the performance, Beethoven wrote a dedication on the manuscript, calling it Sonata Mulatica composta per il mulatto Bridgetower, which basically means mixed-race sonata composed for the mixed-race Bridgetower. He even gave Bridgetower his personal tuning fork as a gift to commemorate the occasion. The quarrel that erased history. But then disaster struck. At the celebrations after the concert, Bridgetower made a crude comment about a woman who Beethoven knew and admired. Beethoven, who was famous for his terrible temper, flew into a rage. He demanded that Bridgetower return the manuscript of the sonata. He declared he was withdrawing the dedication and would give it instead to Europe's greatest violin virtuoso, Rudolf Kreutzer, who lived in Paris. Bridgetower tried desperately to apologize and make things right, but Beethoven refused to forgive him. Within a week, Bridgetower left Vienna to visit relatives in Poland. The two men never spoke or saw each other again. When the sonata was published in 1805, it carried Kreutzer's name instead. The irony is that Kreutzer looked at the piece and declared it impossible to play. He never performed it even once. Life after Beethoven. Bridgetower returned to England and continued his music career. He joined the Royal Society of Musicians in 1807 and earned a Bachelor of Music from Cambridge in 1811, becoming one of its earliest documented black graduates. He performed Beethoven's music in London in 1813, married Mary Leach Leake in 1816, and had a daughter, Felicia. Bridgetower kept composing for violin, piano, and ensembles, but most of his works were lost. Only a few pieces survive, including Diatonica Armonica and the Ballad Henry. The Forgotten Final Years. By his 80s, Bridgetower's life had taken a tragic turn. His marriage had failed, he was estranged from his daughter, and severe arthritis ended his violin career. New stars like Paganini replaced him, and he spent his final years in a poorhouse in Peckham, unknown to those around him. When he died on February 29, 1860, he was buried in Kensal Green Cemetery, his name largely forgotten by the musical world. Why his story matters today. For more than 150 years, George Bridgetower's story was largely forgotten, even though the Kreutzer Sonata he premiered was world famous. In 1858, a writer noted that almost nothing about Bridgetower could be found in music records. His legacy only resurfaced when scholars began researching black contributions to classical music. In recent years, poets, filmmakers, and musicians have helped restore his story, including works by Rita Dove and his portrayal in Immortal Beloved. Bridgetower's life shows how easily history can erase great achievements. As a black musician in 18th and 19th century Europe, he broke barriers, played for kings, impressed Beethoven, and premiered one of classical music's most celebrated pieces. George Bridgetower wasn't a footnote. He was a prodigy, a collaborator, and a central figure in one of classical music's most iconic moments. His story reminds me that history doesn't always forget people by accident. Sometimes it chooses to. The real question isn't whether Bridgetower mattered. It's why so few people were ever taught his name. What part of his story surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your reaction. Like the video, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves music, history, or untold stories. Until next time, dig deeper, honor the truth, and remember that brilliance doesn't disappear just because it's ignored.